I think there are three aspects of Democrat gun control that Democrats like to present as being popular on both sides of the aisle. And I want to present the arguments against these three things now because they aren't conservative policies. They aren't keeping in the spirit of our Second Amendment, and they are dangerous to our gun rights. These three things are universal background checks, an assault weapons ban, the kind that we saw in the 1990s, and red flag laws. So start first with universal background checks. What's the problem here?
Sure. The problem with universal background checks is that they end up creating what's known as a registry of American gun owners. So right now, when you go to a firearms dealer and you buy a gun, that record of the sale is saved. You go through the background check, and the federal government, if that gun was ever to be used in a crime, they can trace it back to you because they have a record of you buying that gun through the licensed dealer because you went through the background check. The problem with universal background checks is when you open this up and make it mandatory for all firearm transfers, the government would essentially have to have the ability to trace it back just like they would with a dealer. Otherwise, the background check law is unenforceable. So if you give the government this power to be able to trace whether or not a gun was transferred legally or not, you are giving them the power to create a registry of American gun owners. And the problem with that is every time in world history that a government has ever tried to create one of these, it's been used for mass confiscations of firearms. You look at the Soviet Union, you look at China, even in places like the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, their firearm confiscations were preceded by national registration. So if we give the government this power, world history shows that if not next year, if not a decade from now, eventually it will be abused like that.
Right. So answer me this question. Is there any way around the government being the entity to keep the records of those background checks if we were to have universal background checks, which means background checks on private purchases between two private citizens, not gun dealers? Is there any way around the government being the one to keep those records?
There is. You could create a system, and this is what the White House is kind of toying with. Create a system where, when you sell a gun privately, you have the ability to check whether the person you're selling it to is a law-abiding citizen or not. So, not a mandatory background check system where you'd have to submit this record to the government, but the opportunity for you to say, "Hey, before I give this gun to this guy, let me just make sure that he's a law-abiding citizen. He's not a criminal." If you were to create a system like that that secured the data and that didn't create a registry from this background check, then yeah, you could do it. Because I've sold guns to private individuals before. I've made sure that they had a driver's license. I've checked them out as much as I could. If I had the ability to do that without giving all that data just to the government, of course I would take that, because I don't want to sell a gun to someone who's a criminal or mentally ill or whatnot. So if you could create a system like that where it was voluntary, where gun sellers, private individuals who are selling their collections, would be able to check who they're selling it to without creating that registry, then that would obviously be the way to go.
Right, and the question there would be who would host that, or who would have ownership over that data that would either prevent an abuse of that data or prevent the government from being the ones with, I guess, access, unlimited access to it, or the ability to abuse it.